I am Ethan Caldwell, 34 years old, currently living in a luxury apartment in Seattle. Last year, I sold a tech startup for $5 million, a sum large enough to allow me to live comfortably for the rest of my life without needing to do anything else. $5 million in the bank, no wife, no children. Life seemed to have reached the pinnacle of perfection. But no. The relationship between me and my father is the blot of ink staining the pages of that rosy novel. My father, Robert Caldwell, was once a prominent real estate businessman. But after a series of failed deals, he became bitter and controlling. Not controlling my life, but controlling my wallet. In his eyes, I am not a son, but a walking source of money. This morning, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the dark green dress shirt that my mother loved. Today is her birthday, and as usual, the whole family will gather at the old house in the suburbs of San Francisco. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the heavy feeling that always comes when I think about facing my father. The man who, in all my life, has never hugged me, never asked if I was okay, and only ever looked at me as if I were a walking safe. In truth, that's still far kinder than how he treated me when I was a child. He was an alcoholic, and whenever he was drunk, he would drag me out and beat me. No reason, no warning. Those memories are etched into me like scars that never heal, and every time I face him, those scars bleed again. I drove my BMW X7 smoothly along tree-lined roads, the afternoon sunlight dancing on the windshield. I turned on the radio, trying to let the music drown out the tangled mess of thoughts in my head. When I pulled up in front of the familiar two-story wooden house, my mother was already standing at the door, her smile as radiant as the sun. "Ethan, you're here!" she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume warmed my heart, as if it soothed some of the wounds within me. The party took place in the backyard garden. Lanterns hung delicately, cheerful laughter mingled with the soft strains of jazz music. My mother, Margaret, was the center of everyone's attention. At 60, she still exuded elegance, her silver hair neatly pinned up, her brown eyes sparkling with gentleness. I looked at her, silently grateful that no matter how the world turned upside down, my mother remained my anchor. My father, as usual, stood in a corner of the garden, a glass of red wine in hand, his cold gaze sweeping over the crowd. He wore a gray suit, still looking distinguished, but his smile always sent a chill down my spine. I tried to avoid him, focusing on chatting with a few relatives, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes following my every step. "Ethan," my father's voice rang out as I was grabbing some cake from the buffet table. I turned around to see him approaching, a glass of shimmering red wine in his hand. "Have a drink with your father, son. A special glass just for you." He emphasized the word special, his smirk making me uneasy. I took the glass, my fingers gripping it tightly. "Thank you, Father," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother was nearby, laughing with Aunt Susan, and I didn't want to do anything to worry her. I raised the glass and took a sip. The wine was rich, slightly bitter, but nothing seemed unusual. I looked at my father. He nodded as if he had just completed a task. Just a few minutes later, my head began to spin. Everything around me became blurry, the laughter and chatter of the guests echoing as if from a distant place. My heart pounded, my breathing grew heavy as if the air was being sucked away. "Mom," I whispered, trying to walk toward her, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stumbled, the wine glass falling to the grass and shattering. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the old bed in the upstairs bedroom. My head throbbed, my body felt drained of all strength. My mother sat beside me, her hands tightly clutching mine, her eyes red and swollen. "Ethan, are you okay?" Oh God, I was so scared. Her voice trembled as if she had just lived through a nightmare. "What happened?" I mumbled, trying to piece things together. The image of the wine glass, my father's smile, and the dizziness came rushing back like a wave. I looked at my mother, searching for answers in her eyes, but she only shook her head, stroking my hair the way she did when I was a child. "You passed out in the garden. Your father said you drank too much, but I know you didn't. You only had one glass, didn't you?" She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. I nodded, my throat dry. One glass. Just one glass of wine from my father. I held my mother's hand, feeling her fingers tremble slightly. The room was silent save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I wanted to say something to reassure her, but I was drowning in a sea of doubt myself. That glass of wine, my father's cold smile, and the sensation of being drained of life, all were pieces of a puzzle that didn't yet fit together. "Ethan, I'm so worried," my mother said, her voice softening as if afraid someone outside might hear. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden where I had collapsed. "What you went through, the dizziness, the shortness of breath, losing consciousness, I've seen it before. It was just like my father." I froze, my heart pounding. "Grandfather?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I had only met him a few times as a child, a tall man with a booming laugh. But my mother had told me he died suddenly when she was young. "A heart attack," she had said. She turned back to me, her eyes red, her hands clasped tightly as if to keep herself from falling apart. Yes, my father collapsed like that too after an evening of drinking with friends. He was healthy, Ethan, just like you. No illnesses, no warning signs, but the next morning, he didn't wake up. Her voice trembled, each word seeming to be dredged up from an old buried pain. I stood and walked to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mom, I don't think it was an illness." I hesitated, unsure whether to voice the suspicion screaming in my head, but her eyes, filled with both fear and hope, compelled me to speak. "I get regular checkups, you know that. My heart, my blood, everything's normal. No signs of any hereditary conditions." She looked at me, her eyes widening as if she had just realized something horrific. "Then, what do you think happened?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, feeling as though I were standing on the edge of an abyss. "Mom, I think there was something wrong with the glass of wine Dad gave me." The words spilled out and I saw her step back, her hand covering her mouth, her face paling. "Ethan, what are you saying? Robert is your father." Her voice was filled with pain, but I caught a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But didn't you notice? He kept emphasizing that the glass was special. I drank it and then I collapsed. I wasn't drunk, Mom. I only took one sip." I paused, looking directly into her eyes. "You thought it was strange too, didn't you? Dad said I drank too much, but you know the truth." My mother sank into a chair, her trembling hands clutching a cold cup of tea. She was silent, but I could see the struggle within her, between her love for my father and her maternal instincts. I don't want to believe it," she said, her voice breaking. "But it's true, I did find it odd. Your father insisted you were drunk, but I looked at you and I knew you weren't." We sat there in silence like two weary travelers lost in a storm. I took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Mom, I'll find out what happened. I don't want to suspect Dad, but I need to know the truth." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Be careful, Ethan. If you're right, I won't let anyone hurt you." As I left the house, I felt both relieved and weighed down. My mother believed me, at least in part. But the suspicion about my father, even as a mere thought, was like a crack in the foundation of our family. I drove home, my resolve burning fiercely. I would uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. After the conversation with my mother, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, each step trembling. The suspicion about my father clung to me like a shadow, but I had no proof. Only the glass of wine, his cold smile, and the gut feeling that I had narrowly escaped death. I wanted to forget, to believe it was all in my imagination, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw my own eyes, the eyes of someone who couldn't stand still. Thanksgiving arrived, bringing with it the biting cold of November. My mother called, her voice gentle but filled with hope. "Ethan, come home for dinner, will you?" Just one evening. I wanted to refuse, to stay far away from the house, now shrouded in darkness, but I couldn't bear to disappoint her. "I'll come," I said, though my heart felt heavy as lead. The old house appeared under the glow of dusk, the light from the windows spilling out like small flames. I stepped inside, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie filling the air, but it did nothing to warm me. My mother hugged me, her smile still radiant, but I saw the worry hidden in her eyes. My father sat at the head of the dining table, a glass of red wine in hand, his gray suit impeccably pressed. He looked at me, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Ethan, are you feeling all right? After that fall in the garden?" His voice was even, but I could hear the mockery in it. I sat across from him, forcing a calm expression. "I'm fine, Father. Thank you." But my hands clenched under the table, my nails digging into my palms. My mother bustled about, bringing out dishes, her chatter with Aunt Susan filling the air. But my focus was solely on my father. His gaze followed me, like a predator stalking its prey. When the main course was served, my father stood, raising his glass. "To family, to Thanksgiving," he said, his eyes locked on mine. He handed me a glass of red wine, its color glinting under the candlelight like fresh blood. "Drink, Ethan. This one's special." The word special rang out, identical to the night of my mother's birthday. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming. Number, I wouldn't let it happen again. I took the glass, my fingers trembling slightly. My mother was in the kitchen fetching dessert. My father watched me, his gaze challenging. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I pretended to drop my napkin, bending down to pick it up, and in a split second, I swapped my glass with his on the table. The movement was lightning fast, unnoticed by anyone. I sat up straight, my heart pounding like a drum, sweat trickling down my forehead. My father raised his glass, took a large sip, then turned to talk to Uncle Paul. I gripped his glass, now mine, but didn't drink. I waited, watching. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, nothing. I started to think I was paranoid. But then, about 45 minutes later, my father stopped mid-sentence. He clutched his chest, his breathing labored. "Robert, what's wrong?" my mother cried, rushing to his side. He staggered, the wine glass falling to the floor and shattering. He clutched his head, his face ashen, then collapsed. My mother's scream tore through the air. The dining table erupted into chaos, Aunt Susan calling for an ambulance. I shot to my feet, but not out of fear, because a horrifying truth was dawning on me. Dizziness, shortness of breath, fainting. Just like me on my mother's birthday, just like my grandfather, as my mother had described. "Call an ambulance now," I shouted, but my eyes stayed fixed on my father. He lay on the floor, his breathing faint, his glassy eyes staring at me. In that moment, I saw a flicker of panic in his gaze, as if he knew what he had just drunk. The ambulance arrived and the paramedics took him away. My mother sobbed, clutching my hand. "Ethan, what's happening? Why is this happening?" I hugged her, but my mind was reeling. If I hadn't swapped the glasses, I would be the one lying there. The thought hit me like a knife. "Mom, I need to take a sample of the wine from that glass," I whispered. She looked at me, her eyes filled with horror, but she nodded. I knew she was thinking what I was thinking. When everyone left, I quietly collected a sample of the wine left in my father's glass, the one meant for me. I poured it into a small vial and tucked it into my pocket. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of my father collapsing, his eyes and the red wine haunted me. I was right. My father had tried to kill me, and now I would prove it. The days following Thanksgiving, I lived like a fugitive, not fleeing from someone else, but from my own thoughts. The image of my father collapsing, the panic in his eyes, and the small vial of wine I kept in my coat pocket haunted me. Each night I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was going mad or if I had truly come close to dying at my father's hands. But I knew I couldn't stop. I needed the truth, even if it tore our family apart. I contacted a private laboratory in San Francisco, a discreet place I'd heard about from friends in the tech industry. I didn't dare send the wine sample through the mail, too risky. Instead, I drove there, the vial tucked in my coat pocket like a tiny bomb. The technician, A middle-aged woman with thick glasses looked at me curiously as I handed her the vial. "I need it tested for anything unusual," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "as fast as possible." She nodded, asking no questions. 3 days, she said. Those 3 days felt like 3 years. I returned to my apartment, locked the door, and drew the curtains as if afraid my father might appear at any moment. My mother called, her voice frail. "Ethan, your father's doing better. The hospital said he went into shock, but they couldn't find a cause. Do you know anything?" I heard the doubt in her voice, but I didn't dare tell her. "I'm looking into it, Mom, don't worry." But I was the one dying inside from worry. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was the technician. "Mr. Caldwell, we have the results. You should come in." Her voice was cold, professional, but I sensed the gravity behind it. I raced to the lab, my heart pounding. She handed me a report pointing to a bolded line, "Barbiturate, high concentration." "It's a sedative," she explained. "This dose was enough to cause unconsciousness, even death if not treated in time." I stood frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. Barbiturate, not alcohol, not drunkenness, not illness. Someone had deliberately put poison in my glass of wine, and I knew who. I looked at the technician, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Thank you. Don't tell anyone about this." She nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. On the drive back, I circled the city, my mind reeling. My father, the man who raised me, the man I had once tried to please despite his coldness. Why? Then I remembered my wealth, $5 million, no wife, no children. If I died, my father was the legal heir. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. He didn't just want to control me, he wanted me gone. I parked by the bay, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The cold wind blew, but I felt nothing except the anger burning inside me. My father had tried to kill me not once, but twice. And if I hadn't swapped the glasses on Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be standing here. I gripped the report tightly, resolute. I would confront him. Not for revenge, but so that my mother and I could be free. My father was discharged from the hospital a week later, looking weaker, but his eyes still sharp as a blade. My mother wanted me to visit, but I knew this wasn't an ordinary visit. I brought the lab report, tucked in my coat pocket like a protective talisman. As I stepped into the old house, I saw my mother in the kitchen preparing tea. "Ethan, you're here," she smiled, but I saw the sadness in her eyes. "Your father's in the living room." I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked in. My father was seated in an armchair, a glass of wine again in his hand. He looked at me, that familiar smirk curling his lips. "Ethan, come to visit your old man. That's good of you." His voice was light, but I could sense the wariness beneath it. "I need to talk to you privately," I said, my voice firm. My mother was in the kitchen, out of earshot. He raised an eyebrow, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the lab report and placed it on the table in front of him. "Barbiturate," I said, staring into his eyes. "In the wine you gave me on Thanksgiving. Enough to kill. Explain." His face stiffened, but he quickly regained his composure. "What are you talking about, Ethan? Poison? You've lost your mind." He laughed, but the laugh was forced, unable to mask the panic in his eyes. "Don't lie," I said, my voice cold as stone. "I swapped the glasses with you. That's why you collapsed, not me. I have proof. The lab confirmed it. If you don't tell the truth, I'm taking this to the police." Silence. Only the ticking of the clock and my father's heavy breathing filled the room. Then, like a wall crumbling, he slumped, his hands covering his face. "Ethan, forgive me," he whispered, his voice breaking. I only meant to knock you out. I was going to forge a will, take your money. I'm in too much debt, Ethan. I had no way out." I stood there, looking at the man who was once my father, now just a desperate shell. His confession cut like a knife, but strangely I didn't feel anger, only sadness, deep and heavy. "Why, Dad?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I'm your son." He didn't answer, only bowed his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. I thought of my mother, of the years she spent living with a man like him. I wanted to call the police to make him pay, but I knew it would destroy her. "I won't go to the police," I said, my voice trembling. "But from now on, stay away from me and don't ever touch Mom." I turned and walked away, leaving him in the cold room. As I stepped out, I saw my mother standing at the door, her eyes red. She had heard everything. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble. "Ethan," she whispered, but said nothing more. I knew from this moment everything would change forever. I left the living room, leaving my father sitting there, his head bowed like a broken statue. His confession echoed in my mind, each word a fresh cut. I had thought confronting him would bring relief, but it didn't. Only pain, heavy and cold. As I stepped into the hallway, trying to hold myself together, I saw my mother standing at the kitchen door, her hands gripping the frame, her face pale. "Ethan." Her voice trembled, her eyes red and brimming with tears. I froze. She had heard it all, the confrontation, my father's confession, everything. I walked to her, wrapping her in a hug, feeling her tremble in my arms. "Mom, I'm sorry," she whispered, as if she were the one at fault. "I never imagined Robert could." I led her to the garden where the lantern still glowed faintly from her birthday. We sat on the wooden bench, the silence broken only by the rustle of the wind through the trees. I held her hand, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice steadier. "Ethan, I heard everything. What your father said, I can't believe it, but there's something I need to tell you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both pain and resolve. "The symptoms you had on my birthday, they were exactly like my father's. He collapsed too after an evening of drinking with Robert." She paused, as if summoning the courage to continue. "My father died soon after. Everyone said it was a heart attack, but I always found it strange. He was healthy, no illnesses. And after he died, Robert inherited nearly all of my family's wealth. I felt my blood run cold." "You suspect Dad was involved in Grandpa's death?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want to think it, Ethan. I loved your father. I wanted to believe in him. But now, I'm afraid I've been living with a monster." Her words were like a cold wind, stripping away any remaining illusions. I hugged her tighter, feeling her pain merge with mine. "Mom, if you're right, we need to find the truth," I said, my voice firm. "Not just for me, but for Grandpa, and for you." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll help you, Ethan. No matter what happens, I want to know the truth." We sat there under the dim moonlight, mother and son, now allies in a battle neither of us could have foreseen. I knew the road ahead would be painful, but I was no longer afraid. With my mother by my side, I was ready to face anything. The day after, my mother and I began our quest for the truth. We didn't talk much, only acted like two soldiers in a silent battle. I suggested starting with the safe in my father's study, where he kept important documents. My mother agreed, though I saw her tremble as she opened the door to that room. "I haven't been in here in a long time," she said softly. "Robert didn't like me touching his things." The safe sat in the corner, a cold block of steel. My mother remembered the code, their wedding date, a detail that stung my heart. Inside, we found real estate papers, contracts, and an old, worn, leather-bound notebook. "This was my father's journal," my mother whispered, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. The scrawled handwriting of my grandfather emerged, chronicling his final days. One entry stopped us cold. "Robert's acting strange. Last night, after a glass of wine, I felt dizzy, short of breath. I suspect he means me harm. If something happens to me, investigate." My mother and I looked at each other, speechless. My grandfather's words, like a message from the past, confirmed our fears. "Mom, we need experts," I said. I contacted a private investigator, Mr. Harris, who had helped a friend in a lawsuit. I also called a lawyer, Anna, who specialized in criminal cases. Both agreed to meet with us. Harris suggested exhuming my grandfather's autopsy report. If there was poison, traces could still be found even after all these years, he said. With Anna's help, we obtained a court order. The exhumation process was slow, but the final results hit like a tidal wave. The autopsy report revealed that my grandfather had been poisoned with a sedative, closely related to barbiturate. Not a heart attack, not natural causes. We dug deeper. Harris uncovered forged documents in my father's inheritance records, mismatched signatures, irregular transfer agreements. Each piece of evidence was a brick, building a wall of guilt around my father. My mother sat beside me, reading each document, her face growing harder. I lived with him for over 30 years, she said, her voice breaking. I knew nothing, Ethan. I took her hand. It's not your fault. He deceived us both. But I saw a fire in her eyes. Not grief, but determination. She was no longer the submissive wife. She was a mother, a daughter, seeking justice. My mother didn't hesitate. I'll sue him, she said, her voice steady as stone. Not just for you, but for my father. Robert has to pay. I had never seen her so strong. We prepared everything with Anna and Harris. The file was thick. The lab report on the wine, my grandfather's journal, the autopsy report, and the forged documents. Each page was a knife into my father's past. The trial took place on a gray, rainy day. I sat beside my mother, holding her hand, feeling her icy fingers. My father stood in the dock, no longer the powerful man I once knew. He looked aged, his eyes hollow, but he still tried to deny the charges. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice weak. But the evidence was undeniable. Anna laid out every detail. The wine laced with barbiturate, the intent to kill me. My grandfather's journal, the autopsy report, and the forged documents proving my father had poisoned my grandfather to seize the family's wealth. The prosecutor called my mother to the witness stand. She stood tall, her voice clear, recounting the years of living with a manipulative husband and the pain of learning he had killed her father. I watched her, my heart swelling with pride mixed with sorrow. My father had no chance. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. Attempted murder for me and first-degree murder for my grandfather. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As the police led him away, he turned to look at my mother and me, his eyes empty. I felt no triumph, only a void where our family once stood. After the trial, my mother moved in with me in San Francisco. The old house was sold, a way for us to close the door on the past. My mother found peace, free from my father's manipulation. She started gardening, tending to lavender blooms, and every afternoon we sat drinking tea, talking about simple things. I looked at her, seeing her smile return, though tinged with lingering sadness. Are you okay, Mom? I asked one day as the sunset bathed the garden in gold. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I'm okay, Ethan. Justice has been served. My father can rest in peace and you're safe. That's all I need. I found peace too, though the scars from my father would never fully heal. I continued my work, but now I lived for my mother, for the simple moments we shared. Under the sunset's glow, I knew we had emerged from the darkness together.